The scrapyard had always been a place of broken things. Twisted metal, rusted engines, shattered machines that once roared with life but now lay silent under layers of dust and neglect. But for Rowan Hale, it was home, a place where nothing was ever truly beyond saving, where even the most damaged parts could be repaired, repurposed, given a second chance if someone was willing to put in the effort, and that belief extended beyond machines, even if he had never quite admitted it out loud. That night, the storm came without warning. Thunder rolled low and heavy across the hills, lightning splitting the sky in jagged flashes that illuminated the vast expanse of scrap like a graveyard of forgotten giants. And Rowan was just finishing up in his workshop when his dog, Brim, suddenly stiffened near the doorway, a low, uneasy growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it?" Rowan asked, wiping grease from his hands as he stepped outside, the cold rain hitting his face instantly. Brim didn't bark, didn't move forward. He just stared, fixed and unblinking, toward the far edge of the yard. And then Rowan saw it. At first, it looked like another wreck. Something large, collapsed, half buried under sheets of bent metal and debris that had likely shifted in the storm. But then, it moved. Not much, just enough. A slow, trembling shift that sent a ripple through the scattered scrap around it. Rowan's breath caught. "No way," he whispered, because he knew what it was before he got close enough to confirm it. You didn't mistake something like that. Even broken, even dying. A dragon. Not the towering, fire-breathing monsters from Old War stories, but something far more real and far more dangerous. A dragon warrior, its armor cracked and scorched, its scales dulled with soot and blood, one massive wing twisted at an unnatural angle beneath it, as if it had fallen from a great height and barely survived the impact. Brim let out a sharp bark this time. "Easy," Rowan muttered, placing a steady hand on the dog's back. "Easy. It's hurt." The dragon's eye snapped open, sharp, focused, and filled with pain. For a brief moment, instinct took over, the air between them tightening as the creature's body tensed, as if preparing for one final act of defense. But whatever strength it had left faltered almost immediately, its head dropping slightly, its breathing uneven and shallow. It wasn't preparing to fight. It was barely holding on. Rowan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Guess you're not just fixing engines tonight." Brim glanced up at him, tail flicking uncertainly, as if waiting for direction. "We can't leave it," Rowan added, already moving forward. The closer he got, the worse it looked. Deep gashes cut across the dragon's side, some cauterized by heat, others still bleeding sluggishly. Its armor, clearly forged for battle, was shattered in places, fragments embedded into its own flesh from the force of whatever had struck it. And its wing, that was the worst part. Bent, broken, possibly beyond repair. Rowan crouched slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, visible. "Hey," he said softly, "not here to finish you off." The dragon's eye tracked him, suspicious, tired, but aware. Brim stepped forward next, slower than usual, his usual confidence replaced with cautious curiosity, and after a brief hesitation, he did something unexpected. He sat down, right there, in front of the dragon, calm, non-threatening. Rowan blinked. "Good call," he murmured. The dragon's gaze shifted between them. A human, a dog, neither attacking, neither running. That alone seemed to confuse it more than anything else. Rowan took advantage of that moment. "Listen," he said, his voice steady. "You're in bad shape, real bad. I've got tools, supplies, place to work. But you gotta let me help." No response, just that steady, watchful eye. So Rowan did what he always did when something broken didn't respond right away. He started anyway. "Brim bag," he said. The dog moved instantly, trotting back toward the workshop and returning moments later with a worn leather satchel clutched gently in his jaws, dropping it beside Rowan with practiced precision. "Good boy." Rowan opened it quickly, pulling out bandages, antiseptic, basic tools. Nothing meant for something this large, this complex. But it was what he had. It would have to be enough. "All right," he said under his breath. "Let's see what we can do." The first touch was the hardest. As his hand made contact with the dragon's side, the creature tensed sharply, a low growl building in its chest. But Rowan didn't pull away. He didn't press harder either. He just stayed. "Easy," he said softly. I know. I know." Brim shifted closer, sitting beside Rowan now, his presence steady, calm, as if reinforcing the message in a way words couldn't. The dragon's growl faded. Not gone, but quieter. Rowan got to work, cleaning wounds first, carefully, methodically, ignoring the way his hands shook slightly as he navigated injuries far beyond anything he had ever treated before, using water, cloth, anything he could to remove dirt and debris, to stop the bleeding where he could, to stabilize what he couldn't fix outright. Minutes turned into an hour. The storm raged around them, but in that small pocket of the scrapyard, something else was happening. Something quieter, something far more remarkable. At one point, the dragon shifted, a pained movement that threatened to undo everything Rowan had done so far. But before Rowan could react, Brim stepped forward, pressing gently against the dragon's uninjured side. Not pushing, not forcing, just grounding it. And it worked. The dragon stilled again. Rowan stared for a brief second. "You're full of surprises tonight, huh?" he muttered. Bit by bit, the worst of the bleeding slowed. The visible wounds were treated as best as they could be in the open rain. But Rowan knew that wasn't enough. Not for something like this. It needed shelter, proper tools, time. "All right," he said finally, wiping his hands. "We gotta move you." The dragon's eye flicked toward him again. Uncertain, wary, but no longer purely defensive. "Not far," Rowan added quickly. "Workshop's close. Dry. Safer than this." A pause. A long one. Then, barely noticeable, the dragon shifted. Not away, but slightly forward. An answer. Not in words, but clear enough. Rowan let out a slow breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We can work with that." What followed wasn't easy. It took everything Rowan had. Every bit of strength, every tool, every improvised solution he could think of. Rigging up supports from scrap metal, using chains and pulleys meant for engines to carefully lift and stabilize parts of the dragon's body without causing further harm. Guiding its movements inch by inch toward the workshop while Brim stayed close, alert, ready, his presence a constant reassurance in the chaos. By the time they got the dragon inside, Rowan was soaked, exhausted, and covered in grime and blood. But the creature was alive, still breathing, still holding on. And as Rowan finally stepped back, looking at the massive, wounded warrior now resting within the dim, flickering light of his workshop, he realized something he hadn't expected when the night began. This wasn't just another repair job. This wasn't just another broken thing to fix. This was something else entirely. A life, a story, a second chance. For both of them, dragon. The workshop had never felt so small. Rowan Hale had spent years working inside those metal walls, surrounded by engines, frames, and machinery in various states of ruin and repair, and he had always known exactly how to navigate every inch of it, where to step, what to reach for, how to adapt. But now, with a wounded dragon warrior taking up nearly half the space, everything felt different, tighter, heavier, as if the air itself had shifted to accommodate something far greater than steel and bolts. The creature barely moved once they got it inside. Exhaustion had taken over where pain had once dominated. Its massive body lying still against the reinforced floor Rowan had hastily cleared. Its breathing deep but uneven, each rise and fall of its chest carrying a faint tremor that made Rowan acutely aware of just how fragile this situation really was. "All right?" Rowan muttered, wiping his hands on an already ruined cloth. "We've stopped the bleeding for now. But that's not the real problem." Brim sat nearby, ears alert, eyes fixed on the dragon, as if watching over it, or guarding Rowan. Maybe both. Rowan stepped closer again, slower this time, studying the dragon not as a mechanic looking at a machine, but as something far more complicated, far less predictable. "Let's take a proper look at you," he said quietly. The dragon's eye opened halfway, not fully alert, but aware enough. And this time, it didn't react with immediate tension. That alone told Rowan everything he needed to know about how far they had already come in such a short time. "Good," he murmured. That's good. He started with the wing, because it was the worst of it. Carefully, he moved along its length, examining the angle, the joints, the way the membrane had torn in places where the fall, or whatever had happened before it, had put too much strain on it. Yeah, Rowan exhaled slowly. That's not just a break. It was worse. The joint itself looked misaligned, possibly shattered. And if that was the case, even if the dragon survived its other injuries, it might never fly again. Rowan glanced at its face, at the faint awareness still lingering in its gaze. We'll figure something out, he said more firmly now. One step at a time. Brim shifted slightly, letting out a low, soft sound. Not a growl, not a bark, but something in between, something almost encouraging. Rowan huffed faintly. Yeah, no pressure. He grabbed what tools he had that could even remotely apply. Metal braces, adjustable clamps, reinforced rods, scraps that could be reshaped into something useful, and began the careful, painstaking process of stabilizing the wing. This wasn't precision work. Couldn't be. Not with what he had. But Rowan had built entire engines from scrap that should have been impossible to salvage. Improvisation was his specialty. Still, this was different, because this wasn't metal. It was alive. Every adjustment mattered. Every movement could either help or make things worse. All right, he said softly, positioning one of the supports. This is gonna hurt. The dragon's body tensed slightly, as if it understood. Rowan paused, waited, gave it a moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he began to realign the damaged section. The reaction was immediate. A deep, strained sound rumbled from the dragon's chest, its muscles tightening, claws digging faintly into the floor, but it didn't lash out, didn't strike. It endured. Brim moved closer instantly, pressing himself gently against the dragon's side again. That same grounding presence as before, steady and unwavering. Easy, Rowan said, his voice calm despite the intensity of the moment. Almost there. Almost. Took everything. Precision, patience, and more than a little luck. But finally, the alignment settled into place. Not perfect, but better. Stable enough to give it a chance. Rowan quickly secured the makeshift brace, locking the structure in position, reinforcing it with layered supports until he was satisfied it would hold. Then he stepped back, breathing hard. That's the best I can do right now, he admitted. The dragon's breathing slowly evened out again, the worst of the immediate strain passing, its body gradually relaxing back into stillness. Rowan watched it for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. You're tough. I'll give you that. But toughness wasn't the only thing that mattered, because as Rowan moved to check the rest of its injuries, something else caught his attention. The armor. Up close, it was even more intricate than it had seemed in the storm, etched with patterns that weren't just decorative, but purposeful, functional, designed to work with the dragon's body rather than against it. Each piece fitted precisely along the contours of its scales. This wasn't random. This was crafted, deliberate, which meant one thing. This wasn't a wild dragon, Rowan murmured. Brim's ears twitched. No, Rowan continued, examining one of the fractured plates. This one belonged somewhere, fought somewhere, a warrior. And warriors didn't end up half dead in scrapyards by accident. Something had happened, something big enough to bring it down. And that meant trouble might not be far behind, Rowan finished under his breath. As if on cue, the dragon stirred slightly, its eye opening a bit wider this time, focusing on him with a sharper awareness than before. Not just pain now, not just exhaustion, something else. Recognition, or maybe concern. Rowan held its gaze. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm thinking the same thing. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Rowan did something unexpected. He sat down, right there, on the cold workshop floor, not working, not fixing, just being there. You don't have to worry, he said after a moment. Whatever put you in this state, it's not getting to you here, not while I've got a say in it. Brim settled beside him, resting his head lightly against Rowan's leg. The dragon watched them both, silent, still. but listening. And slowly, very slowly, the tension in its gaze softened. Not gone, but less sharp, less guarded. Rowan let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," he murmured. "We'll figure this out together." Outside, the storm began to fade. The thunder grew distant. The rain softened to a steady, quiet rhythm against the metal roof. But inside the workshop, something far more important had taken hold. Not just survival, not just recovery, but the beginning of something neither of them had expected. A bond. Fragile, unspoken, but real. And whatever came next, Rowan had a feeling it was going to test that bond in ways he wasn't even close to ready for. Dragon. The night stretched on, each hour heavier than the last, as Rowan worked tirelessly to stabilize the dragon warrior, improvising solutions from scraps, clamps, and old metal rods, every movement careful, deliberate, and weighted with the knowledge that a single misstep could undo all their progress, while Brim remained at his side, a silent sentinel, sensing danger Rowan could not yet see and offering reassurance to the massive creature whose breathing had gradually slowed but remained ragged. With pain and exhaustion, Rowan's hands were streaked with grease, blood, and dirt, and his clothes were soaked with rainwater that had tracked inside with the dragon, but he barely noticed. His mind was entirely focused on the fragile thread of life beneath his fingers, on the subtle signs of distress, on the shallow but steady rise and fall of the warrior's chest, and on the occasional twitch of the injured wing that signaled both pain and a stubborn refusal to give up, a warrior's instinct alive even in the brink of collapse. "Almost there," he murmured quietly, applying another improvised splint to reinforce the damaged wing, testing each movement with a careful touch to ensure the brace held without causing more harm, and the dragon, though it did not speak, responded in subtle ways, a soft exhale, a tiny shift of weight, a flicker of its eyes, all of which Rowan interpreted as consent to continue, a silent agreement that he could be trusted, and in that moment, Rowan understood the magnitude of the responsibility. Before him, this was not just a wounded creature. This was a warrior, a survivor, a being that had faced battles he could not even imagine, and it was depending entirely on a human it had never known to give it a chance at life. Rowan leaned back for a brief moment, hands trembling slightly, and looked down at Brim, who rested his head on Rowan's knee, eyes wide, as if to say, "We're not done yet, but we've got this." Rowan smiled faintly, scratching behind Brim's ears, and whispered, "Yeah, we've got this." Though he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The dragon's breathing was more even now, but there was a stiffness in its movements that spoke of injuries far deeper than the surface wounds. Joint damage, internal bruising, possibly broken ribs. Rowan could patch the external injuries, could stabilize the wing enough to prevent further damage, but healing would take time, patience, and above all, trust, and the warrior's eyes, when they flicked toward him, carried a wariness that reminded Rowan how rare it was for such a creature to let anyone close. He shifted closer, using a scrap of cloth to dab at the blood-stained scales along the dragon's side, careful not to apply pressure directly to the tender areas. "I know it hurts," he murmured softly, "but you're tougher than this. You've survived worse. We'll get you through it." The dragon's chest rose and fell more evenly, but a low, rumbling growl echoed faintly as though testing Rowan's words, gauging their sincerity. Rowan chuckled softly, almost in disbelief, and said, "Yeah, I'm serious. You're not alone. Not anymore." Brim nudged the dragon gently with his nose, a small gesture that seemed to reinforce the promise, and for the first time, the massive creature gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shiver, a response that could have been fear, acceptance, or something in between. But Rowan took it as a sign that the bond, however fragile, was forming. Hours passed like this. Rowan worked tirelessly, alternating between stabilizing wounds, securing braces, and simply being present, offering the creature a calm, steady presence it could rely on. Occasionally, the dragon would move slightly, testing its limits, shifting its massive weight against the floor, flexing its claws, or trembling in pain. But Rowan adapted quickly, adjusting braces, supporting joints, whispering encouragement, and all the while, Brim never left the dragon's side, his quiet watchfulness providing a grounding presence that seemed to calm both the dragon and Rowan himself. Rowan realized then that survival wasn't just about physical repair. It was about presence, about providing a consistent signal that danger wasn't imminent, that the dragon's life mattered, that someone understood and respected its strength and fragility at the same time. The first faint light of dawn crept through the workshop windows, illuminating the scale patterns along the dragon's battered body in muted blues and silvers, highlighting the scars, scratches, and burn marks it had endured. Rowan rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the weight of the long night pressing down on him. But when he looked at the dragon, he saw something that had not been there before. Recognition, or perhaps something deeper. A spark of acknowledgement that he was no longer just a stranger, but someone who could be trusted with its life. Rowan whispered again, "We're gonna get you fixed. Fully. I promise." Brim let out a soft, approving bark, nudging Rowan's hand as if to seal the promise. Rowan stood, stretching briefly, and surveyed the dragon. Despite its injuries, it was alive, steady, and no longer purely defensive. Its massive head lifted slightly, wings folded more naturally, claws retracted, and the tail, though heavy and stiff, rested with less tension than it had hours before. "Good," Rowan muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "That's good progress." But he knew the real challenge lay ahead. Finding proper materials to fully repair the dragon's wing, addressing internal injuries, and ensuring that the warrior could stand again on its own, and beyond all of that, helping it regain trust. Not just in him, but in the idea that not all humans sought to dominate or destroy creatures like it. Rowan moved to gather supplies for the next phase, thinking through what he could improvise and what would need to be acquired, when a soft rumble from the dragon caught his attention. It was low, almost contemplative, a sound that was not threat nor fear, but something closer to a gratitude. Rowan paused, heart hammering in his chest, and knelt again, placing a hand gently against the dragon's side. "Yeah," he whispered. "I hear you. I get you. You're not alone." Brim rested his head against Rowan's shoulder, and the dragon shifted slightly, allowing the touch, a silent acceptance of the bond forming between them. Rowan realized then that no amount of training, no experience with machines, could have prepared him for this. He was a mechanic, not a healer. He worked on engines and vehicles, not living, breathing, thinking warriors with strength beyond imagination. Yet, somehow, his patience, persistence, and willingness to simply be there had accomplished what brute force or fear could not. A fragile trust. And that trust was powerful. More powerful than any weapon or armor, because it meant that the dragon, even at its weakest, was willing to rely on him. As the morning light strengthened, Rowan took a deep breath and spoke softly. "We're not done. Not by a long shot. But today we survived the night together. That counts for something." The dragon rumbled again. A faint vibration felt through Rowan's hand, and Brim gave a small, satisfied whine, tail wagging slightly. Rowan smiled despite exhaustion. This was only the beginning, but it was proof. Life could be repaired, even in creatures as magnificent and terrifying as a dragon warrior, if approached with patience, respect, and a willingness to stand by them when the world had turned its back. Outside, the scrapyard was quiet, the storm spent, but inside the workshop, an entirely different kind of storm had passed and left its mark. A bond forged not through force or dominance, but through presence, compassion, and shared survival, and Rowan knew deep down that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats had caused this warrior to fall in the first place, they would face them together, human, dog, and dragon, united by trust and the silent promise that neither would face the next. Storm alone. Dragon. The days that followed were a delicate balance of tension, care, and incremental progress. Rowan Hale had never imagined his life would revolve around a creature like this. Yet each morning he woke to the sound of Brim's soft whines and the faint rumbles of the dragon, already beginning to stir, and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down more heavily than any engine hoist or wreck he'd ever handled. The dragon's injuries had stabilized, thanks to his improvised supports and constant attention, but its body was still fragile. Every step it attempted caused sharp tremors of pain. Every attempt to flex its wings reminded him of how vulnerable it still was. Yet, in those same small, cautious movements, Rowan noticed something miraculous: determination. Despite its battered body, the warrior refused to yield entirely to weakness. Its eyes followed him with the same intensity that had first startled him in the scrapyard. Not suspicion this time, but something else. A careful, measured acknowledgement of the human who had saved it when no one else would. Rowan spent hours improvising devices to help the dragon regain limited mobility. Using scraps of steel and reinforced pulleys, he crafted a harness system to support its weight, allowing the massive creature to lift itself partially off the ground without risking further injury. Brim watched every adjustment with unwavering attentiveness, nudging the dragon gently whenever it shied back in hesitation. "It's okay," Rowan would murmur. "You've got this. We've got this." The dragon responded slowly at first, small tremors running through its body, the flaring of its wings, the twitching of its claws, yet it didn't resist as much as before. Day by day, inch by inch, it began to trust that these human hands were not there to hurt it, that the human presence was a tether to safety rather than a source of danger. Rowan realized this trust was far more significant than any physical repair he could offer. He wasn't just patching a body. He was rebuilding confidence, reconstructing hope, and for a creature of pride and combat, that was a monumental task. Meals were another challenge entirely. The dragon's appetite was minimal at first, and it refused to eat anything that didn't resemble what it had once hunted or been fed in battle. Rowan experimented, combining his limited knowledge of animal nutrition with instinct and observation. He roasted meat over improvised fires, soaking it with minerals and salts that the dragon seemed to instinctively recognize as necessary. It was a slow process, each successful bite a tiny victory, each rejection a reminder of how foreign the human world was to a creature forged in warfare. Brim's presence again proved invaluable. The dog would sit close to the dragon, offering companionship and calm reassurance while Rowan prepared the meals. A silent signal that danger was absent and nourishment was safe. Eventually, the dragon began to eat more confidently, its strength returning, muscles slowly reawakening, wings flexing tentatively. Rowan also worked tirelessly to understand the dragon's history, piecing together clues from its armor, its scars, and the rhythm of its behavior. The plates and etchings in its battle gear suggested a lineage of warriors, disciplined and trained from hatchling to adult. Its scars told tales of battles survived, opponents bested, and perhaps betrayal endured. Rowan had no formal training in history or xenobiology, but his hands knew how to read patterns in mechanics and construction. He applied the same logic to understand the creature before him. "You've been through hell," he whispered one evening, brushing his hand over a jagged scar along its flank. The dragon tilted its massive head, meeting his gaze with a faint rumble, neither agreeing nor denying, but acknowledging that his observation was not entirely incorrect. Rowan felt a shiver of connection. This creature, despite all it had endured, allowed him a glimpse of its past and a chance to rewrite its future. Trust deepened through shared routines and patient care. Rowan allowed the dragon to rest where it chose, never forcing positions or confinement, always offering options and support. Brim's influence remained constant. The dog's calm demeanor acted as a bridge between the human and dragon, a nonverbal mediator that reassured both parties. Gradually, the dragon began responding to his words and gestures. Simple cues, raising a harness, adjusting a splint, offering a hand, were met with tentative movements rather than fear, slight inclinations of the head, subtle shifts of body weight, each one a victory in a silent dialogue that only those who had endured life and death struggles together could truly understand. Rowan marveled at the patience required, recognizing that no machine he had ever repaired demanded this level of intuitive connection, this level of empathy, yet it was a connection that mattered far more than strength or tools. One afternoon, as Rowan was working to adjust the wing support, the dragon suddenly braced itself and lifted slightly off the floor for the first time since its rescue. The floor trembled beneath its weight, and Brim barked excitedly, tail wagging, but Rowan held his breath, eyes wide as the dragon flexed, tested, and maintained balance just long enough to prove that its body could respond to guidance again. A deep, rumbling sound emanated from the dragon, unlike the low growls of warning he had first heard. This was something softer, warmer, a sound of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. Rowan's chest tightened, It was a wordless affirmation that they were no longer two strangers navigating fear and pain, but a team capable of rebuilding strength together. But progress came with its perils. Word of the dragon's presence inevitably spread, reaching ears that would not allow a dangerous warrior to remain unclaimed. Rowan anticipated intrusions, and he strengthened his workshop with additional barriers, reinforced doors, and clever traps to warn of visitors. Yet even as he took these precautions, he realized the greatest threats were not from outsiders. They were from the dragon's own instincts. It had been trained for combat, survival, and dominance. Fear and aggression were embedded deeply, triggered easily by sudden movements, loud noises, or perceived threats. Rowan had to remain calm, composed, a living anchor that could absorb tension without transmitting panic. Each day was a test of endurance, patience, and empathy. One wrong move could undo months of progress. Despite the challenges, small victories accumulated. The dragon began to extend its neck when Rowan approached instead of turning away. It allowed him to inspect claws, test joints, and adjust braces without flaring wings or snapping jaws. It started nudging Brim gently, a sign of acknowledgement and trust, even playfulness, something Rowan had not expected in a creature of such war-hardened stoicism. Meals became more substantial, muscles regained subtle tone, and the warrior's eyes, once hollow with pain and exhaustion, now held faint sparkles of recognition, intelligence, and guarded curiosity. One evening, Rowan sat beside the dragon as the sun set, streaking gold and crimson across the workshop walls. "We're not finished yet," he said quietly. "But look at how far you've come." The dragon rumbled softly, a sound that conveyed neither dominance nor submission, but understanding. Brim rested his head against Rowan's leg, and the dragon leaned slightly toward the human, a gesture of tentative trust that conveyed more than words ever could. Rowan felt a swell of pride and awe. It was more than survival. They had forged a bond through patience, care, and courage, proving that even a creature bred for war and distrust could recognize and respond to genuine compassion. Rowan knew that challenges remained, rebuilding the dragon's wings fully, strengthening its muscles, guarding against those who would seize it for power or profit. But for the first time, he also recognized the truth he had long avoided. This dragon wasn't just a responsibility. It was a companion, a partner in survival, and a living testament to the extraordinary power of empathy, patience, and trust between species. Brim shifted, nudging the dragon again, and Rowan laughed softly. "Yeah, we're a strange team," he said, voice warm. "But damn, we work." The dragon rumbled in acknowledgement, a sound that felt like agreement, and for the first time in a long time, Rowan believed that together, they could face whatever the world might throw at them, unbroken, unafraid, and united. "Dragon,"